She was just a shadow in a cheap apron, invisible, disposable. That's what Dominic Rourke, the most feared man in Chicago's underworld, thought when he tipped his whiskey onto the floor just to watch her clean it up. He laughed. His men laughed. But they didn't see the scars hidden beneath her uniform. They didn't see the calluses on her knuckles. And they certainly didn't know that the trembling waitress named Clara was actually the Wraith, an underground pit fighter who had vanished 3 years ago after killing a man with her bare hands. Dominic just made the biggest mistake of his life, and he's about to fall in love with the woman who might end it. The Velvet Room on West Randolph Street wasn't a restaurant. It was a courtroom where the jury drank scotch and the judge wore a tailored Brioni suit. Clara Reed adjusted her apron, keeping her head down. The rule of survival in the service industry was simple. Be efficient, be polite, but above all, be forgettable. For Clara, being forgettable wasn't just about keeping her job. It was about keeping her life. "More ice," a voice grunted from the corner booth. Clara moved instantly. She didn't look at the faces. Eye contact was an invitation for conversation, and conversation led to questions. She hated questions. She scooped the ice into the crystal bucket, her hands steady. They were hands that had scrubbed floors for 3 years, but before that, they had wrapped around throats. She approached the VIP booth. It was occupied by the Rourke family, specifically Dominic Rourke and his inner circle. Dominic was the kind of man who sucked the oxygen out of a room. He was 32, with dark hair swept back and eyes that looked like shattered slate. He didn't look like a thug. He looked like a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, which in a twisted way he was. His business just happened to be high-stakes gambling and logistics for things that fell off trucks. "You're shaking, sweetheart," one of the men, a heavy-set enforcer named Luca, sneered. Clara wasn't shaking. She was vibrating with suppressed adrenaline. Being this close to men like them triggered a muscle memory she had fought hard to bury. "Leave the girl alone, Luca," Dominic said, though his voice lacked any real kindness. It was bored, dismissive. He swirled his drink, the amber liquid catching the dim light. "She's just trying to make rent." Clara placed the ice bucket on the table. As she withdrew, Luca, feeling bold and perhaps a bit drunk on the top shelf, Whiskey reached out and grabbed her wrist. "Hey, I'm talking to you. What's your name?" Clara froze. The grip was sloppy weak. In a past life, she would have shattered his radius bone, driven her elbow into his solar plexus, and been out the back door before he hit the floor. Instead, she pulled back, making her eyes wide and fearful. "Clara, sir, please." "Clara," Luca mocked, tightening his grip. "Pretty name for a mouse." Dominic looked up then. For the first time, he actually saw her. He saw the fraying collar of her uniform, the messy bun, the lack of makeup. She was plain, painfully so. "Let her go," Dominic ordered, but he leaned forward, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "She's not worth the effort, Luca. Look at her. She's terrified. She's probably never seen a real man in her life, let alone one holding a gun." The table erupted in laughter. Dominic picked up his glass, finished the whiskey, and then, holding Clara's gaze, he deliberately opened his fingers. The heavy crystal tumbler fell. Crash! Shards of glass exploded across the polished floor. Whiskey splattered onto Clara's worn sneakers. The laughter stopped. The restaurant went silent. "Oops," Dominic said, his voice flat. "Clean that up, Clara, and try not to cut yourself. I don't want cheap blood on my floor." Clara stood there for a heartbeat. The disrespect burned. But it was the specific phrase cheap blood that made the dormant beast in her chest open one eye. She didn't cry. She didn't gasp. She simply nodded her face a mask of subservience. "Yes, sir." She knelt. As she picked up the shards, a jagged piece of glass sliced into her thumb. She watched the blood bead up dark red rich. Dominic was watching her. He expected her to flinch. He expected tears. But he saw nothing. Just a rhythmic, efficient cleaning. Interesting, he thought. Most people shake when I break things. She just cleans. He didn't know it yet, but he had just humiliated the only person in the city capable of killing him. The shift ended at 2:00 a.m. The kitchen staff had cleared out, leaving Clara to lock the back door. The Chicago wind cut through her thin denim jacket like a knife. She wrapped her arms around herself, heading toward the L train station on Lake Street. She checked her surroundings. Habit. Left, right, rear view. The streets were empty, save for the flickering street lamp that buzzed like a dying insect. She was 2 blocks away from the Velvet Room when she heard the footsteps. Heavy, uncoordinated, leather soles on concrete. Clara didn't speed up. Running triggered a predator's chase instinct. She kept her pace steady, her breathing controlled. "Hey, Mouse." Clara closed her eyes for a second, exhaling a puff of steam. Luca. She turned around, slowly. It was Luca and another man from the table, a younger guy named Silas. They were smoking cigarettes, grinning like wolves who had cornered a rabbit. "Boss went home," Luca slurred, stepping closer. "But we felt bad about the glass. Thought maybe you needed a tip." He reached into his pocket, but instead of cash, he pulled out a switchblade. He flicked it open. The sound was a sharp snick in the quiet alley. "You got a pretty mouth when you aren't looking at the floor," Silas added, moving to flank her. Clara analyzed the situation in less than a second. Luca 240 Olbs, right-handed, intoxicated center of gravity, high. Silas 170 tools, nervous hands in pockets, likely reaching for a weapon or just posturing. Environment, brick wall to her left, dumpster to her right. 1 exit. "Please," Clara said, her voice dropping an octave. It wasn't the voice of the waitress anymore. It was lower, steadier. "Go home, Luca. You're drunk." Luca blinked, confused by the tone. "What did you say to me?" "I said go home." Luca lunged. It was a sloppy thrust aimed at her ribs, meant to scare rather than kill. Clara didn't think. The mouse vanished. She sidestepped with a fluidity that defied physics. Her left hand shot out, catching Luca's wrist. She didn't just block it. She twisted it against the joint. There was a sickening pop. Luca screamed, dropping the knife. Before the scream could fully leave his throat, Clara spun, driving her heel into his kneecap. The structural damage was instant. Luca collapsed like a folding chair. Silas stared, his mouth open. The shy waitress was gone. Standing in her place was a woman with cold, dead eyes and a stance that was perfectly balanced. "You—" Silas stammered, fumbling for his gun. Clara was on him before he cleared the holster. She closed the distance, grabbed his hair, and slammed his face into the brick wall. Thud. He crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Silence returned to the alley. Clara stood over them, her chest barely rising. She looked at her hands. They weren't shaking anymore. "Damn it," she whispered. She had broken cover. She quickly wiped the handle of Luca's knife with her sleeve, tossed it into the dumpster, and checked their pockets. She took their phone's standard protocol to prevent immediate calls and smashed them on the pavement. She was about to run when she felt it. A gaze. She looked up toward the fire escape of the building opposite the alley. Standing there, shrouded in the shadows of the iron railing, was a figure. The ember of a cigar glowed bright orange, then faded. Dominic Rourke. He had been watching. He had seen everything. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs, harder than it had during the fight. If Dominic knew what she could do, he would look into her past. And if he looked into her past, he would find the bodies. She pulled her hood up and sprinted into the night, vanishing into the darkness. Up on the fire escape, Dominic took a slow drag of his cigar. He looked down at his two best enforcers, groaning in a heap of broken bones, defeated by the mouse in under 10 seconds. A slow, terrifying smile spread across his face. "Well," Dominic whispered to the smoke, "it seems the waitress has a secret." The next day, Clara debated running. She had a go bag hidden under the floorboards of her studio apartment in the Pilsen neighborhood. Cash, 2 fake passports, a burner phone. But running meant starting over, again, and she was tired, so tired. Maybe he didn't see she lied to herself. Maybe it was too dark. She went to work. The Velvet Room was buzzing with the lunch rush. Clara tried to make herself invisible again, but the air felt heavy. Every time the door opened, her muscles tensed. At 100 p.m., the music stopped. The manager, a nervous man named Mr. Henderson, walked into the kitchen. He looked pale. "Clara," he squeaked. You're requested at table 1. Table 1. The boss's table. Clara wiped her hands on her apron. She took a deep breath, visualizing a calm ocean, and walked out. Dominic was there, alone this time. No Luca, no Silas, just him, a plate of untouched risotto and a file folder. He didn't look up as she approached. "Sit." "I'm on the clock, sir. I can't. I bought the restaurant an hour ago." Dominic interrupted, finally looking at her. His eyes were predatory, amused. "So technically you work for me now. Sit." Clara sat. She kept her back straight, her hands in her lap. Dominic slid the file folder across the table. "Luca is in surgery. Reconstructive work on his knee. Silas has a concussion. They told me they were jumped by a rival gang. 4 guys with bats." Dominic leaned back, studying her face. "But I know they weren't jumped by a gang. They were jumped by a girl wearing size 6 sneakers." Clara remained silent. Deny until death. That was the rule. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said softly. Dominic laughed. It was a dark, rich sound. "I watched you, Clara, or whatever your name is. I saw the wrist lock, Krav Maga, or maybe Sistema. It was too messy for judo, too efficient for a bar brawl." He opened the folder. It was empty. "This is your file," he said. "Clara Reed, Social Security number issued 3 years ago. No credit history before 2022. No high school yearbook photos. No family. You popped into existence out of thin air." He closed the folder with a snap. "Who sent you?" His voice dropped, losing the amusement. It became the voice of the Mafia Don. "Are you working for the Russians, the Triad?" "I'm just a waitress," Clara insisted, though she knew the game was up. "A waitress who breaks 240-pound men like twigs." Dominic stood up, walking slowly around the table until he was standing behind her chair. He leaned down, his lips inches from her ear. She could smell his cologne, sandalwood, and gunpowder. "I have enemies, Clara. A lot of them. If you are an assassin sent to kill me, you should have done it last night in the alley." "I'm not an assassin," Clara said, her voice hard. She turned her head, meeting his gaze. "I just want to be left alone." "Too bad," Dominic whispered, "because you just became the most interesting thing in my city." He straightened up and adjusted his cuffs. "You're done waitressing. As of this moment, you are promoted." Clara blinked. "Promoted to what?" "My personal security detail," Dominic said, a wicked grin returning. "I have a meeting tonight with the cartel. It's going to be dangerous, and since you broke my best bodyguard, you're going to replace him." "I refuse," Clara said, standing up. "Refuse, and I send your photo, your real photo, to every contact I have at the FBI, Interpol, and the Underground, whoever you're running from. I'll make sure they find you by morning." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. He had her. He didn't know who she was, but he knew she was hiding. And he held the spotlight. "What time is the meeting?" she asked, her voice like ice. Dominic checked his watch. "Be out front in an hour." "And Clara?" He looked her up and down, his eyes lingering on her figure, seeing the strength she tried to hide. "Wear something that allows for movement. I have a feeling you're going to need to break a few more bones tonight." The car was a matte black SUV armored to withstand high-caliber rounds. Clara sat in the back, opposite Dominic. She had changed into black cargo pants, combat boots, and a fitted black turtleneck. She looked less like a waitress and more like what she was, a weapon. Dominic watched her from over the rim of his tablet. "You look comfortable." "I look like a target," Clara muttered, scanning the passing city blocks. They were heading south toward the shipyards. "Where are we going?" "Meeting a man named Vernon Krov," Dominic said. "He moves product through the Great Lakes. We have a dispute regarding territory." "And you expect trouble?" "With Vernon, always." Dominic set the tablet down. "You still haven't told me your real name." "Clara is fine." "Liar." "Murderer," she shot back. Dominic chuckled. "Touché. But I kill for business. You kill for survival. I can see it in your eyes. You're a cornered animal, Clara. I'm just curious, who put you in the corner?" The car slowed to a halt in front of a rusted warehouse. Rain had started to fall, slicking the pavement. "Stay close," Dominic commanded, opening the door, "and don't speak unless I tell you to." They walked into the warehouse. It was dimly lit, smelling of diesel and fish. In the center, under a single hanging bulb, stood Vernon Krov. He was a giant of a man, flanked by 6 armed guards. Dominic walked in, with his hands in his pockets, projecting an air of casual arrogance. Clara stayed 2 steps behind him, and to the left, her eyes scanning the rafters, the shadows, the hands of the guards. "Dominic," Vernon boomed, his voice thick with a Russian accent. "You bring a woman disrespectful." "She's not a woman, Vernon," Dominic said smoothly. "She's my insurance policy." Vernon laughed. "She looks like stiff breeze would blow her over." One of Vernon's guards stepped forward, leering at Clara. "Maybe I search her for weapons, boss." Dominic didn't move. "I wouldn't recommend that." The guard reached out. Clara moved. She didn't wait for Dominic's order. The guard's hand was inches from her shoulder when she intercepted it. She utilized a wrist-lock takedown, using his own momentum to flip him onto the concrete face first. Before the other guards could raise their rifles, Clara had drawn the gun from the fallen guard's holster and had it aimed directly at Vernon's forehead. The warehouse went dead silent. Dominic hadn't flinched. He just smiled. "See insurance." Vernon stared at the barrel of the gun, then at Clara's unblinking eyes. He raised his hands slowly. Okay. Okay, Dominic. We talk. The negotiation went smoothly after that. No one wanted to test the woman with the dead eyes again. Back in the car, the adrenaline began to fade, leaving Clara feeling hollow. She had exposed her skills again. Every time she fought, she left a signature. You were impressive, Dominic said, breaking the silence. I did what you paid me to do. Now let me go. No. Dominic moved closer to her on the leather seat. The space between them crackled with electricity. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was something hotter, more dangerous. Why? Clara demanded. You have your deal. You have your money. Because, Dominic said, reaching out to tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers grazed her jawline, and Clara's breath hitched. I think I'm starting to like having you around, and I protect what's mine. I'm not yours, Clara whispered. Dominic leaned in his lips, brushing hers, a ghost of a kiss that promised ruin. Not yet. But you will be. Suddenly the car swerved violently. Boom! An explosion rocked the street ahead of them. The SUV slammed into a concrete barrier. Glass shattered. Clara's ears rang. Smoke filled the cabin. Dominic! She screamed. She looked over. Dominic was slumped against the door, blood trickling from his temple. The door on her side was ripped open. Masked men. Not Vernon's men. These were professionals. Tactical gear. Suppressors. The syndicate. Clara's blood ran cold. They had found her. They hadn't come for Dominic. They had used Dominic to get to her. She unbuckled her seatbelt, grabbed Dominic's collar, and dragged him across the seat. She wasn't going to let him die. Not today. Wake up, boss, she hissed, slapping his cheek. Time to fight. The world was smoke-screaming tires and the staccato rhythm of suppressed gunfire. Clara dragged Dominic out of the sheltered side of the ruined SUV. He was groggy, blood streaming down the side of his face from the impact, but he was conscious. Can you walk? She demanded, hefting his arm over her shoulder. The sheer weight of him was immense, but adrenaline was a powerful drug. Yeah, Dominic gritted out, stumbling. Who are they? Not yours, mine. Bullets sparked against the pavement near their feet. Clara didn't flinch. She saw the tactical patterns of the attackers. They were pinching them in, funneling them toward a kill zone. Standard syndicate operating procedure. Move, Clara ordered. She pulled Dominic into a narrow alleyway between two derelict warehouses. 3 men in tactical gear rounded the corner. They raised their weapons. Clara shoved Dominic behind a dumpster and drew the pistol she had taken from Vernon's guard earlier. She didn't hesitate. 3 shots, 3 bodies hit the wet pavement. Headshots, clean, efficient, terrifying. Dominic, leaning against the brick wall, watched her through haze of pain. He had thought her impressive before. Now she looked like a goddess of war. The way she moved wasn't just trained, it was instinctual. She was a finely tuned instrument of death, and right now she was playing his song. We need a car, Clara said, holstering the weapon and checking the fallen men for Sybil magazines. Yours is toast. My phone is gone. My jacket pocket, Dominic groaned. Burner phone. Clara fished it out. Dominic gave her a number. Call Matteo. Tell him code black. Location the old ironworks on 18th. Matteo was Dominic's second in command, the only man besides Luca he trusted completely. 20 minutes later, a nondescript grey sedan skidded into the alley. Matteo, a sharp-faced man in his late 20s, who usually handled logistics, looked pale as he helped get Dominic into the back seat. "Boss, what the hell happened, Vernon?" "No," Dominic said, his head lolling back against the seat. "Something else. Just drive to the safe house on the North Shore. The bunker." The drive was swollen and tense. Clara sat in the back with Dominic, applying pressure to his head wound with a torn piece of her shirt. His blood stained her hands, her clothes. They arrived at a sprawling modernist mansion, hidden by tall pines near Lake Michigan. It was a fortress disguised as luxury. Matteo helped get Dominic into a secure downstairs infirmary that rivaled a small hospital ER. Clara stitched him up. She had done it 100 times before, usually on herself in grimy motel bathrooms. Doing it on Dominic felt different. His skin was hot under her touch. Every time she winced as the needle went in his eyes, clear now, despite the pain, tracked her face. When she tied off the last suture, the room went quiet. Matteo had left to secure the perimeter. It was just them. The air was thick with unsaid things, with the scent of antiseptic and sweat. Dominic reached up and grabbed her wrist. His grip wasn't cruel this time. It was desperate. "Tell me," he commanded. His voice was rough. "The truth. All of it. No more Waitress bullshit." Clara looked at him. The facade was gone. There was no point in hiding. "My name is Anya Petrova." She said the name tasting like ash in her mouth. She hadn't spoken it in 3 years. "I was raised in a facility in Belarus. They took orphans and turned them into assets. Spies. Thieves. Assassins." Dominic's thumb traced the pulse point on her wrist. It was hammering. "I was their best student. They called me the Wraith because I could get in anywhere, kill anyone, and leave no trace. I worked for them for 10 years. Governments, cartels, corporations. If you had enough money, the syndicate would send me." "Why did you leave?" Dominic asked softly. Clara looked away. "There was a job in Paris, a target. Collateral damage was unacceptable to me. There were children. I couldn't do it. I balked. And in the syndicate, disobedience is a death sentence. I faked my death, ran to America, and became Clara the Waitress. I thought I was safe." She looked back at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "They found me because of you, Dominic. Because you pulled me into the light. And now they won't stop until I'm dead." Dominic sat up slowly, ignoring the pain in his head. He pulled her closer until she was standing between his knees. "You think I'm afraid of them?" Dominic whispered fiercely. "Look at me, Anya." She looked. "You're not a weapon anymore," he vowed. "Not theirs. You saved my life tonight. That makes you mine, and I am going to burn the world down to keep you." He kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It tasted of blood and desperation, and a promise of violence. Clara melted into it. For 3 years, she had been cold numb. Dominic was fire. He was dangerous, arrogant, and cruel, but in his arms, for the first time since she was a child, she felt safe. But the safety was an illusion. Upstairs, Matteo closed his burner phone. He looked at the security monitors, showing the perimeter of the estate. He typed a text message. "The package is secure at the North Shore location. The woman is with him. Send the cleaning crew." The attack came at dawn. Clara and Dominic had fallen asleep on the infirmary cot, fully clothed, her head on his chest. The sound of the proximity alarm shattered the silence. "They're here," Clara said, instantly awake. She was already moving toward the weapons locker Dominic had shown her. She tossed him a Sig Sauer P226 and grabbed a carbine for herself. "How?" Dominic snarled, checking the magazine. "Nobody knew about this place except you, me, and—" He stopped. The realization hit him harder than the car crash. "Matteo," he whispered. "The driver?" Clara asked. "My right hand. The man I trusted with my life." Dominic's face hardened into a mask of pure, icy rage. The betrayal stung more than the physical wounds. In his world, loyalty was the only currency that mattered. Matteo had just bankrupted him. "We need to get to the garage," Dominic said. "There's an underground tunnel that leads to the boathouse on the lake." They moved through the mansion, which was rapidly filling with smoke and syndicate operatives. The firefight was intense. They were outnumbered 10-1. Clara took point, moving through the hallways like liquid shadow. She cleared rooms with ruthless efficiency, double-tapping targets before they even saw her. Dominic, despite his injuries, fought with the savage brutality of a cornered lion. They made it to the library. The entrance to the secret garage was behind a bookshelf. As Dominic reached for the hidden lever, the library doors blew open. A flashbang grenade skittered across the floor. Bang! White light blinded them. A high-pitched ringing filled their ears. When Clara's vision cleared, she was onto the floor, coughing. Dominic was on his knees, 2 guns pointed at his head. Standing over him was Matteo, looking smug. Beside Matteo stood a tall, whip-thin man with pale hair and dead eyes. Clara recognized him instantly. Kyle, her former handler at the syndicate, the man who had tortured her into compliance when she was a child. "Anya," Kyle said, his voice smooth and cold like oiled steel. "You look terrible. Domestic life doesn't suit you." Clara started to rise, lifting her carbine. Matteo said, pressing his gun harder into Dominic's skull. "Drop it, Clara, or whatever your name is. Drop it, or the boss loses his brains right here on this nice Persian rug." Dominic looked at Clara. His eyes were pleading not for his life, but for her to run. "Don't do it," his eyes said. "Get out." But Clara couldn't. The waitress who hid under tables was dead. The woman who loved Dominic Rourke was standing there. Slowly, deliberately, Clara set the carbine on the floor and kicked it away. She raised her hands. "Smart girl." Kyle smiled. "Take him." 2 operatives grabbed Dominic, hauling him to his feet. He struggled, spitting blood at Matteo. "You're dead, Matteo. You hear me? I'll peel the skin off your face." Matteo just laughed nervously. "Business is business, Dom. The syndicate pays better." Kyle looked at Clara. "You, my dear, are coming home. We have much to discuss regarding your sabbatical." "Let him go," Clara said, her voice calm, devoid of emotion. "You want me. He's just a local gangster. He's nothing to you." "He's leverage," Kyle said, "to make sure you behave on the flight back to Belarus. If you try anything at all, I will have them send you his fingers one by one." They dragged Dominic out the front door toward a waiting helicopter on the lawn. Clara was zip-tied and shoved into the back of an SUV. As the convoy pulled away, Clara looked out the window at the burning mansion. She felt a cold emptiness settle in her chest where her heart used to be. They had taken the only thing that mattered to her. They thought they had broken her. They thought they had the Wraith captured. They were wrong. They had just unleashed her. The world was reduced to the rhythmic drip of condensation and the smell of ammonia. Clara sat in the darkness of the holding cell. Her knees pulled to her chest, her back pressed against the cold cinder block wall. Her wrists were raw. the plastic zip ties biting deep into her skin, cutting off circulation until her hands were numb, ghostly white claws. But Clara wasn't there. She had retreated into the grey room, a mental construct she had built when she was 8 years old in the Syndicate's training facility in Belarus. In the grey room there was no pain, there was no fear, there was only calculation. Heart rate 48 beats per minute, respiration shallow controlled, objective survive, eliminate, retrieve. She wasn't Clara the waitress anymore. She wasn't even Anya the assassin. She was something primal, a creature of pure instinct that had been woken up by the smell of Dominic's blood back at the mansion. The Syndicate's temporary base was a sprawling, abandoned meatpacking plant on the industrial south side of Chicago. It was a carcass of a building, a maze of rusted catwalks, freezing lockers, and killing floors that still stank of old blood and bleach. It was the kind of place people went to disappear. Footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Heavy boots on concrete. Clara opened her eyes. The pupils dilated instantly, adjusting to the low light. The heavy steel door groaned open. A silhouette filled the frame, a guard, thick-necked and bored, holding a bottle of water and a protein bar. He didn't have his weapon drawn. He saw a small woman, zip-tied in the corner, bruised and silent. He saw a victim. It was the last mistake he would ever make. "Eat," the guard grunted, tossing the bar onto the dirty floor near her feet. "Kyle wants you awake when he starts the interrogation." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him, but not locking it immediately. He leaned down, a smirk playing on his lips. "You don't look so tough now, Wraith. You look like a little girl." Clara watched his center of gravity. She watched the casual way his hand rested near the taser on his belt, not his gun. He was arrogant. "I am thirsty," Clara whispered. Her voice was a dry rasp, pathetic and broken. The guard scoffed, uncapping the water bottle. He took a step closer, bending at the waist to offer it, enjoying the power dynamic. Clara moved. It wasn't a movement the human eye could easily track. One moment she was huddled in a ball, the next her legs had uncoiled like industrial springs. She launched herself upward, not away from him, but directly into his personal space. She drove her forehead into the bridge of his nose with a sickening crunch. The guard's head snapped back, his hands flailing instinctively to his face, dropping the water. Before he could scream, Clara swept his legs. He hit the concrete hard, the air leaving his lungs in a wheezing gasp. Clara didn't hesitate. Bound hands or not, she was a weapon. She dropped her knees onto his chest, pinning him, and looped her zip-tied arms over his head. She pressed the plastic binding against his windpipe and pulled back with every ounce of hysterical strength she possessed. He thrashed. He clawed at her arms, his fingernails digging into her skin. But Clara felt nothing. She stared into his widening eyes, her face a mask of stone, until the light in them flickered and went out. His struggles ceased. Clara exhaled slowly. Heart rate 110. Stabilizing. She scrambled off the body, her movements sharp and jerky. She rifled through his pockets with numb fingers until she found a combat knife. She sawed through the zip ties, hissing as blood returned to her hands in a painful rush. She stood up and rolled her shoulders. She stripped the guard of his gear. She took his belt, holstering his Glock 19 and checking the magazine full. She took the knife. She took his comms earpiece and shoved it into her ear. Static crackled, followed by a voice she knew too well. "Mateo is getting impatient. He says the Rourke guy is bleeding out too fast. He wants to know if he can cauterize the wound." It was Kyle, her handler, the architect of her nightmares. "Stabilize him." Kyle's voice came through the earpiece, smooth as oiled steel. I want him conscious for the finale. Bring him to the kill floor. Section 4B, the freezer. Clara's blood ran cold, then hot. Section 4B. She slipped out of the cell, moving into the corridor. She didn't run. Running made noise. She flowed. She stuck to the shadows, moving heel to toe to silence her boots. The plant was a labyrinth of rusted machinery and hanging chains. Clara climbed a maintenance ladder, ascending to the catwalks high above the main floor. From here, she was a spider in the web. She looked down and saw patrols moving in grid patterns. They were professionals, syndicate shock troops, but they were looking for a prisoner on the run. They were looking for someone fleeing the building. They weren't looking for someone hunting them. Clara moved across the catwalks, bypassing 2 guards who were smoking near a ventilation fan. She could have killed them, but death was a currency she had to spend wisely tonight. Every gunshot was an alarm bell. She reached the heavy industrial doors marked 4B. Frost clung to the hinges. The air radiating from the room was arctic. She found a ventilation grate overlooking the room. She peered through the slats. The room was massive, a cathedral of cold. Meat hooks hung from ceiling tracks like iron stalactites. In the center of the room, illuminated by harsh halogen work lights, was a steel chair bolted to the floor. Dominic was there. Clara's breath hitched. He looked ruined. His tailored suit was shredded. His white shirt stained a deep, heavy crimson. His head hung low, chin resting on his chest. His face was swollen, one eye completely shut, blood dripping steadily from a gash on his temple to pool on the concrete. Matteo Dominic's former right hand was pacing nervously around the chair. He held a blowtorch in one hand and a rag in the other. He looked pale, sweating despite the freezing temperature. "He's not talking, Kyle," Matteo stammered, looking toward the shadows in the corner. I think he's unconscious again." Kyle stepped into the light. He hadn't aged a day in 3 years. He was tall, whip-thin, wearing a pristine charcoal suit that looked out of place in the slaughterhouse. He moved with a predatory grace, cleaning his fingernails with a small, curved scalpel. "He isn't unconscious, Matteo," Kyle said softly. "He's stubborn. There is a difference." Kyle walked over to Dominic and grabbed a handful of his dark hair, yanking his head back. Dominic groaned a low, guttural sound of agony. "Dominic," Kyle purred. "Let's be reasonable. The Wraith. Anya, where are her contingency funds? Where are the files she stole from us when she defected? You're her lover. Pillow talk is inevitable." Dominic cracked his good eye open. He spat a mouthful of blood onto Kyle's polished shoes. "She's going to kill you," Dominic rasped. His voice was broken glass, but the defiance was intact. "She's going to peel you apart." Kyle sighed, looking down at his shoes with disappointment. "Predictable." He nodded to Matteo. "Wake him up properly. Use the torch." Matteo hesitated. "Kyle, if we kill him." "Do it." Kyle snapped his veneer of calm, cracking for a split second. Up in the ventilation shaft, Clara closed her eyes. She inhaled deeply, filling her lungs with the freezing air. She visualized the trajectory. She visualized the outcome. She kicked the grate out. It clattered to the floor below, echoing like a gunshot. Matteo spun around, looking up the blowtorch flaring in his hand. "What the—" Clara dropped. She fell 20 feet, landing in a crouch on top of a stainless steel prep table. The impact jarred her bones, but she rolled instantly, coming up with the Glock extended. She didn't scream. She didn't announce her presence. Target 1. The traitor. Matteo raised the blowtorch, fumbling for his own gun tucked in his waistband. He was too slow. He had always been a logistics man, not a soldier. Bang! The shot was deafening in the enclosed space. The bullet caught Matteo in the throat. He dropped the torch, clutching his neck, as bright arterial spray painted the frost-covered floor. He collapsed, gurgling, staring at Clara with wide, confused eyes. As he died, Clara didn't watch him fall. She was already pivoting. Target 2, the monster. Kyle was faster, much faster. As soon as the grate fell, he had moved, putting Dominic and the steel chair between himself and Clara. He used Dominic as a human shield, peering over his shoulder, his own weapon, a silenced USP, drawn and leveled. "Anya!" Kyle shouted, his voice echoing off the metal walls. "Welcome home. I was wondering when you'd drop in." Clara kept her gun trained on Kyle's exposed forehead, but she couldn't fire. The risk of hitting Dominic was too high. She stepped off the table, her boots crunching on the frost. "Let him go, Kyle," she said. Her voice was steady, devoid of the fear she had felt 3 years ago. "This is between you and me. It's always been between you and me, little bird." Kyle smiled. He pressed the barrel of his gun into Dominic's temple. "Drop the piece, or I paint the wall with his brains." Dominic struggled against his bonds. "Clara, don't. Shoot him. Shoot through me if you have to." "Silence, Kyle." Pistol whipped Dominic, sending a fresh wave of blood down his face. Clara's finger tightened on the trigger, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She couldn't do it. She couldn't risk Dominic. Slowly, she crouched and set the Glock on the floor. She kicked it away. It slid across the ice, spinning out of reach. "Good." Kyle grinned. "Now the knife." Clara pulled the combat knife from her belt and tossed it aside. "Hands on your head," Kyle commanded, stepping out from behind Dominic. He kept his gun trained on her chest. "You've been a naughty student, Anya. Running away. Playing house with a gangster. Did you really think you could wash the blood off your hands with dish soap? I'm not Anya," Clara said, her eyes tracking Kyle's approach. "You will always be Anya." Kyle sneered. He was 10 feet away. "You are what I made you. A killer. A tool. Nothing more." He was 5 feet away. "Turn around," he ordered. "On your knees." Clara looked at Dominic. His eyes were pleading with her to run, to fight, to do anything but surrender. She held his gaze for a heartbeat, sending him a silent message. "Trust me." Clara began to turn. As she did, her eyes locked onto a meat hook hanging on a chain just above Kyle's head, swaying slightly in the draft. She dropped to one knee. "That's it," Kyle said, lowering his gun slightly as he reached for his handcuffs. "Submission suits you." Clara exploded into motion. She didn't turn around. She grabbed the leg of the heavy stainless steel prep table next to her and heaved it upward with a roar. The table flipped, acting as a momentary shield. Kyle fired twice. Thwip, thwip. The bullets sparked off the metal table. Clara used the distraction to lunge. She didn't go for Kyle. She went for the chain. She grabbed the iron link and swung her entire body weight into it. The heavy meat hook swung like a pendulum, a rusted iron claw cutting through the air. Kyle saw it too late. He tried to duck, but the hook caught him in the shoulder, tearing through his expensive suit and digging into the muscle. The force of the blow knocked him sideways, sending his gun skittering across the floor. He howled in rage, ripping the hook free from his flesh. Blood soaked his shoulder instantly. "You bitch!" Kyle screamed, drawing a long, serrated dagger from a sheath at the small of his back. Clara stood her ground. She was unarmed. She was smaller. She was exhausted. But she was the queen of the underworld. Kyle charged. He was a whirlwind of violence, his blade flashing in the halogen light. Clara retreated, dodging, weaving. She parried a slash that would have opened her throat, taking a deep cut on her forearm instead. She hissed, but didn't slow down. They danced across the killing floor. It was a brutal, ugly fight. Kyle was technically superior, his movements polished by decades of training. But Clara was fighting with something he didn't understand. Kyle feinted left and kicked her hard in the ribs. Clara heard something crack. She stumbled back, gasping for air, slipping on the frost. Kyle was on her instantly. He tackled her, slamming her back into the concrete. He pinned her arms with his knees, raising the dagger high for the killing stroke. "I made you," Kyle screamed. His face twisted into a mask of pure hate. "And I will break you." The blade came down. Clara didn't try to block it. She bucked her hips, throwing Kyle's balance off by a fraction of an inch. The knife plunged into the concrete right next to her ear, sparks flying. Before he could pull it out, Clara drove her thumbs into his eyes. It was a dirty, desperate move, one forbidden in the sparring rings of the syndicate. But there were no rules here. Kyle shrieked, reeling back his hands, flying to his face. Clara scrambled out from under him. She didn't run. She grabbed the fallen blowtorch that Matteo had dropped. She ignited it. The blue flame hissed to life. Kyle was swinging blindly, his eyes streaming tears and blood. "Where are you? I'll kill you." "I'm right here," Clara said coldly. She swung the heavy canister of the blowtorch like a club. It connected with Kyle's jaw with a bone-shattering crack. Kyle spun around, dazed, falling to his knees. He looked up, his vision blurry, trying to focus on the woman standing over him. Clara stood silhouetted against the harsh lights. She looked like an avenging angel, battered and bloody, holding the blue flame like a sword. "You didn't make me," Clara whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of her truth. "You just stole my life, and I'm taking it back." Kyle tried to reach for his dropped knife. "Anya, please." "My name," she said, raising the torch, "is Clara." She swung the torch down. Not the canister this time. The flame. She drove the nozzle into his chest, into the open wound where the meat hook had torn him. The heat was instantaneous. The scream that tore from Kyle's throat was inhuman, a sound that would haunt the nightmares of anyone who heard it. But it didn't last long. Clara didn't stop. She channeled every year of torture, every night of fear, every drop of blood she had spilled for them, and she burned it all away. When Kyle finally stopped moving, Clara let the torch drop. It clattered on the floor, the flame sputtering out. Silence returned to the freezer. Heavy, suffocating silence. Clara stood there, her chest heaving, her hands shaking uncontrollably. She stared at the body of the man who had owned her for 10 years. He looked small now, just a pile of meat in a cold room. "Clara." The voice was weak, barely a whisper. Clara snapped out of her trance. She spun around. "Dominic." She rushed to the chair, her hands fumbling for the knife Kyle had dropped. She sawed through the ropes binding Dominic's wrists and ankles. As the last rope fell away, Dominic slumped forward. Clara caught him, her small frame straining under his dead weight. They collapsed together onto the freezing floor. "I got you," Clara sobbed, the tears finally coming. She pressed her face into his blood-soaked shirt. "I got you, Dom. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Dominic groaned, shifting so he could look at her. His hand, trembling and battered, came up to cup her cheek. He smeared blood on her skin, but neither of them cared. You came back," he whispered, coughing wetly. "You could have run." "I don't run anymore," Clara said fiercely. She ripped a strip of fabric from her shirt and pressed it against the gash on his temple. "You burned him," Dominic said, a ghost of a smile touching his swollen lips. "Remind me, never to piss you off." Clara let out a wet, choked laugh. "Come on, we have to go. More might be coming." "I can't walk," Dominic admitted, grimacing as he tried to shift his legs. "Kyle, he did a number on my knee." "Then I'll carry you," Clara said, and she meant it. She pulled his arm over her shoulder. "On 3. 1, 2, 3. With a grunt of effort, she hauled him up. Dominic cried out, his face going grey, but he found his footing on his good leg. Leaning heavily on her, they began the slow, agonizing shuffle toward the exit. They passed Matteo's body. They passed Kael's body. They moved out of the freezer and into the warmer air of the corridor. The contrast made Clara dizzy. Her adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a crushing exhaustion and the sharp sting of her own wounds. "Where are we going?" Dominic asked, his voice slurring slightly. "My old apartment," Clara gritted out, navigating them toward the loading dock. "The floorboards. I have cash. Passports. A medical kit." "No passports," Dominic muttered. "Not leaving Chicago." Clara stopped for a second, looking at him. "Dominic, they know who we are. The syndicate won't stop." Dominic stopped her, forcing her to look at him. He leaned against a rusted pillar, swaying, but his eyes burned with that familiar, arrogant fire. "We cut off the head," Dominic said. "Kael was the head of North American operations. Without him, they're blind. Chaos." He gripped her shoulder. "This is my city, Clara, and now it's yours too. We don't run. We rebuild. We make them afraid to ever come back." Clara looked at him. She saw the madness in his eyes, but she also saw the strength. He wasn't just a gangster. He was a king refusing to abandon his throne, and he was offering her the crown. She thought about the years of hiding, the cheap aprons, the fear of eye contact, the loneliness. Then she looked at the man bleeding onto the concrete beside her, the man who had been willing to die rather than give her up. Clara tightened her grip on his waist. "Okay," she whispered. "We stay." They reached the loading dock doors. Clara kicked the bar and the door swung open. The morning sun hit them like a physical blow. It was blinding golden and clean. The air smelled of ozone and city dust, not blood and bleach. The sound of distant traffic, the heartbeat of Chicago washed over them. Clara took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the free air. She was bruised, cut, burned, and exhausted. She was a murderer. She was a liar. But as she walked Dominic Rourke out into the light, she realized something else. For the first time in her entire life, she was free. "Clara?" Dominic asked, squinting in the sunlight. "Yeah. I think I need that whiskey now." Clara smiled, a real smile, one that reached her eyes. "I'm buying," she said. Together they limped away from the slaughterhouse, leaving the ghosts of their pasts to rot in the dark, walking toward a future that was dangerous, uncertain, and entirely their own. 3 weeks later. The Velvet Room had been reopened. The glass floor was repaired. The clientele was the same rich, powerful, dangerous men in expensive suits. But something had changed. The air in the restaurant was different. Dominic Rourke sat in his usual corner booth. He still had a slight limp, and a faint scar ran through his left eyebrow, giving him an even more menacing appearance. He wasn't alone. Clara sat beside him. She wasn't wearing an apron. She wore a tailored black silk blouse and trousers that cost more than her old apartment. Her hair was down, cascading over her shoulders, and her eyes, once lowered in submission, scanned the room with the sharp, assessing gaze of a queen surveying her court. There was no more hiding. The city knew. The whispers had spread like wildfire. Dominic Rourke hadn't just survived a war with the international syndicate. He had won it thanks to the woman at his side. The Wraith. A nervous waiter approached the table, a new hire, young and terrified. "Mr. Rourke, Miss Reed, can I get you anything?" Dominic didn't answer immediately. He reached out and took Clara's hand, interlacing their fingers on the tabletop. The diamond ring on her finger caught the light, sparkling dangerously. He looked at Clara, a small, possessive smile on his lips. "What do you want, my love?" Clara looked at the waiter, then gave Dominic a slow, knowing smile that promised trouble later that night. "Whiskey," Clara said, her voice clear and commanding. "Neat. And bring the bottle. We're celebrating." "Celebrating what, ma'am?" the waiter asked nervously. Dominic squeezed her hand tight. "Survival," he said, "and the beginning of a very interesting partnership." The waiter scurried away. Dominic and Clara looked at each other. They were both monsters in their own way, forged in violence and trauma. But they had found the one person in the world whose darkness matched their own. And in that darkness, they had found a strange, unbreakable kind of light. They owned the city now. And God help anyone who tried to take it from them. Thanks for listening to this story. If you enjoyed this Mafia romance saga hit, that like button hard, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. What did you think of Clara's transformation? Let me know in the comments below. See you next time.